Tuesday, October the 24th, 2006, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi was formally received at the Belgian Senate by its President, Ms. Anne-Marie Le Pen, and a number of other senators. The visit came despite the Iranian regime's schemes and extensive efforts, including exerting pressure on the Belgian government and twice summoning the ambassadors of Belgium and Finland, which currently holds the European Union's rotating presidency. The clerical regime had threatened to reject the credentials of Belgium's new ambassador to Tehran. After meeting Mrs. Rajavi, Mrs. Le Pen told the Belgian daily Le Soir the purpose of the visit was to remove the People's Mujahideen from the EU's terrorist list, where they were initially put with enormous haste. In the meeting attended by the first Vice President of the Senate and its Foreign Affairs Committee, Mrs. Le Pen strongly condemned the increasing human rights violations in Iran, saying that the people of Belgium and their representatives stood on the side of the Iranian people and their resistance for democracy and human rights in Iran. Mrs. Rajavi also took part in a separate meeting attended by dozens of Belgian senators and parliamentary deputies. Senators Staaf Niemergeers, Senate First Vice President, Patrick van Kronkelsven, Pierre Galland, Foreign Affairs Committee Vice Chair Lionel Vandenberg, Committee First Vice Chair Sabine de Bethune, leader of the Christian Democrat Group, Mr. Herman van Rompuy, member of the Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and former Deputy Prime Minister.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Je viens d'avoir une discussion positive avec les sénateurs et les députés. Je les ai remerciés.
Later in the day, Mrs. Rajavi, accompanied by a number of lawmakers, took part in the press conference. Senators Marguerite Hermans, Women's Committee First Vice Chair, and Pierre Galland, the Foreign Affairs Committee's Vice Chair, also attended the press conference. Mrs. Rajavi criticized the EU's policy on Iran, underscoring that despite the failure of appeasement, Europe continued to lack a principled policy towards the mullah's regime. She emphasized that the answer to the crisis was neither in a foreign military intervention nor in appeasement, but in democratic change by the Iranian people and their resistance.
Madam Rajavi is prone to answer some questions. You can
On Wednesday, Mrs. Rajavi took part in an international conference of jurists in defense of Ashraf City. Some of the more preeminent international law experts and jurists from different countries attended and addressed the conference, including Professor Eric David, expert on international humanitarian law and the president of the Center for International Law at the Brussels Open University, Professor Mark Henslin, a distinguished Swiss lawyer, Mark Muller QC, Chair of the Human Rights Committee of the British Bar Association, Trond Olsen Nace and Vidar Rugland, Norwegian lawyers, Edward Greaves, a British lawyer and a member of the Bar Association's Human Rights Committee, and Gilles Paruel, former chairman of the Bar Association in France's Val d'Oise province. They discussed various legal opinions about the status of the PMOI in Ashraf City and reaffirmed their political refugee status. Dr. Maryam Rajavi, NCRI representative in France, also addressed the conference.
To actually continue to recognise the political refugee status of those that have been accorded that status under Iraqi law.
It's interesting to note that when the Secretary of State for the Home Office in the United Kingdom prescribed the PMOI, he described it as an Iranian dissident organisation based in Iraq which claims to be seeking the establishment of a democratic socialist Islamic Republic in Iran. The Secretary of State went on to say that the organisation undertakes cross-border attacks into Iran, which includes attacks against government buildings in Tehran and elsewhere. And he also stated that the organisation has not attacked the United Kingdom or Western interests. It's therefore at least arguable that in the past, because the PMOI no longer conduct any activities in Iraq, that these acts possibly could be defined as political acts and would not justify exclusion of PMOI members on that basis from the protection of the Refugee Convention. However, the United Kingdom's statutory definition of terrorism does not take into account any acts which may be on account of power struggles and ignores the contextual circumstances, hence the terrorist label.
The people of Camp Ashraf are, and this is my legal opinion, protected by both the 4th Geneva Convention and international law and the internal Iraqi law. When I went to Camp Ashraf, I had a meeting with several Iraqi lawyers and judges, and all of them said the same. All of them agreed that everybody was in Camp Ashraf was protected by the 4th Geneva Convention and international law and the internal Iraqi law.
As I said, they didn't succeed in 2004, and they will not succeed this time either. In the end, I want to say that if there is anybody from the Iraqi regime who are looking now at the television station in Ashraf, I want to give them just a clear message, and I want to look in the camera and tell them that we follow you very closely for what you are doing. Thank you.
On the third day of her visit, Mrs. Rajavi took part in a meeting of leading women in the equality movement. Mrs. Maggie de Block, Belgian MP, Senator Clotilde Nissens, Fatima Moussavi, member of Brussels Parliament, and a number of women officials from Belgian parties attended the meeting. Mrs. Rajavi urged activists of the equality movement to support the Iranian people and democratic change in Iran. She said that this was the only way to overcome the crisis the international community faced. She added that in the resistance it was concluded that women's participation in political leadership was indispensable to the struggle against the mullahs. Mrs. Rajavi's trip to Belgium and her meetings with senators and parliamentarians received widespread coverage in the domestic and international media.
La visite au Sénat en Belgique de Maryam Rajavi, présidente du Conseil national de la résistance iranienne, le principal mouvement d'opposition au régime de Téhéran.
Daar is van de week de Iraanse oppositieleidster Maryam Rajavi op bezoek geweest.
Maryam Rajavi werd afgelopen dinsdag ontvangen in de Senaat door onder meer Senaatsvoorzitter Lizijn. Rajavi leidt vanuit haar ballingsoord Parijs de Iraanse Nationale Verzetsraad, waar